Are you getting started with drip irrigation? Over the years, we have gathered a trove of tips and tricks, insights from both our own experiences, your valuable feedback, and our fair share of trial and error. Today, I'm happy to share these with you in one comprehensive tips and tricks video. Whether you've got two green thumbs or diving into DIY irrigation for the first time, these tips and tricks will help you through the entire process, from installation to your first watering cycle. Number 1, organize your parts. One of the first things I like to do when installing a new drip irrigation system is to organize the parts into piles of like parts. This means I put elbows with elbows, T's with T's, head assembly parts with one another. This way, when it's time to install that part, I know exactly where to go and find it. Number 2, the hot water trick. If you're using a barbed insert fitting or a lock style fitting and it's cold outside, it could be difficult to push the tubing on over the barb of the fitting. One tip that makes this much easier is to dip the end of the tubing into a cup or pan of very hot water. Be careful not to burn yourself. Leave it there for a few moments and the tubing will soften up. When poly tubing softens up, it becomes very flexible, which makes it significantly easier to push on over the barb of one of the fittings. Number 3, the right way to install your head assembly. When installing your head assembly, it's a good time to check the female connections for the gasket. The female connections in any hose-threaded connection should have a gasket. That's actually what completes the seal. Also, don't use any Teflon tape. Hose-threaded connections don't need Teflon tape. It can actually cause problems that it's meant to prevent for pipe-threaded connections. Also, finger or hand tighten only. What we like to do is finger, hand tighten, and then maybe another quarter to half turn after that. And going along that same vein, don't use any tools to tighten your connections. If you tighten the connections, you're very likely to damage the female connection and cause leaking that you're trying to prevent. Another tip is in regards to a leaking backflow preventer. Believe it or not, a little bit of a leak can be completely normal and could indicate that it's working as it should by bleeding out water that might have otherwise siphoned back into your potable water supply. Number 4, unrolling and installing your tubing. It is much easier to unroll and install your tubing when it's warm. When tubing gets warm, it gets flexible and it'll help it keep a straight shape while you unroll it. The easiest way to heat up your tubing is to cut the bands that holds it together and place it in direct sunlight about an hour before you're ready to install your system. In addition to that, stake your tubing about every 6 to 10 feet and can vary depending on conditions. This will hold it in place while you unroll and install your tubing. Number 5, punching your tubing and pushing in barbed fittings and barbed drippers. In the last 2 tips, I told you that it's easier to work with tubing when it's hot. Well, in this tip, it's actually easier to work with tubing when it's cold. When tubing's cold, as you know, it becomes a little bit more stiff and less flexible. And this allows punches and barbed drippers and fittings to pop through the tubing instead of bending and flexing it. Now that you know all of these tips, you can plan your installation accordingly and do your unroll when it's hot and punch when it's cold, either later in the evening or early in the morning. Number 6, use a tubing cutter. Scissors are usually pretty good at cutting tubing, but if you're having any difficulty, there are special, inexpensive cutters that are designed specifically to cut through poly tubing. Number 7, burying your tubing. If your tubing needs to travel across your yard, it is perfectly acceptable to bury it. Just like you do with PVC, give it a soft, crumbly bed of soil to lay in, and then bury it about 4 to 12 inches deep. This will keep it safe from the lawnmower, the kids, and the dog. Number 8, use a punch with a lever. Some punches, you have to rely on pure strength and weight to punch the hole. However, we do have some punches that come with a lever. If you have weakened hands or arthritis or anything like that, you can use the punch with the lever, simply squeeze it together, and it will punch the holes in your tubing. In addition to being useful for folks with weakened hands, punches with levers are almost a must in larger commercial applications where potentially thousands of holes will have to be punched. Number 9, goof plugs. If you're going to be working with barb drippers, a 1/4 inch punch, or 1/4 inch barb fittings, you're going to want some goof plugs to fill up any mistakes you make. Trust me on the goof plugs. Here's a quick tip for goof plugs. Use a pair of needle nose pliers to install them. It makes it much easier to pop the large end of the goof plug into the tubing for a nice, tight, water-secure fit. Number 10, order additional couplers. You'll be glad you did. Couplers join 2 pieces of tubing together, something you'll probably be doing on occasion when installing the system. But perhaps more importantly than that, you want some left over after you're done with the installation. Why? Because those same couplers are also used to make repairs. If you hit your tubing with your lawnmower and cause a big section of damage, what are you going to do? Well, if you have a coupling, you can simply cut the damaged section out and splice in some new tubing. If it's a small piece of damage, you can just cut that little part out, use one single coupling to rejoin the 2 undamaged portions. Number 11, use inline shutoff valves throughout the system. Inline shutoff valves allow you to turn off anything downstream of the valve. This means if you harvest a bed or a portion of the garden earlier and it no longer needs water, you can shut it off while you leave the rest of the system running. Number 12, think about including a timer. A timer is great. It can fully automate your system. Never again will you forget to turn the water on, or even worse, sometimes forget to turn the water off and flood your yard. One of the biggest keys to success in growing a garden is consistent watering, and a timer can help you achieve that. Number 13, clean your filter. When filters get dirty, they can cause pressure loss within the irrigation system. You might notice symptoms like some of your drippers aren't dripping as they should, or some of your sprayers aren't spraying as far as they used to. This can be the sign of a clogged filter. Now, cleaning drip irrigation filters is easy. Simply unthread the house from the filter, take out the element, and give it a good rinse from the outside in if it's a screen filter. If it's a disc, it's a little bit more involved, as you got to separate the disc and spray them off. If the filter was dirty, once it's clean, you'll see pressure restored to your system. Number 14, flush your lines. Flushing your lines can prove invaluable. Debris and sediment can build up in the lines. Flushing the lines is simply removing the end cap, turning on the water, and allowing water to flush out the end for a few moments. This takes any debris or dirt that got inside and flushes it right out the end instead of potentially clogging your emitters. Think of this as a way to scrub your system clean. Depending on your water quality, flushing frequency can be as often as every watering cycle, or when you're running off clean municipal water, at least at the start and end of every growing season. Number 15, winterize your system. When water freezes, it can expand by about 10 to 12%. This expansion can cause damage to irrigation components, so drain your lines of water so that when the freeze happens, it doesn't crack any of your equipment. Now, if you live in Florida, this tip might not apply as much as if you live in Maine. There are a few ways to winterize, so check out our drip irrigation winterization guide in the top right to learn more. Number 16, install a pressure regulator. We get this question a lot. Do I need a pressure regulator? The answer with the drip irrigation system is almost always going to be yes. In addition to protecting your components from potentially high pressure damage, they also maintain a nice, easy downstream pressure. What this does is keeps all the emitters dripping nice and uniformly across the entire system. If you don't have a pressure regulator, some of your components might become damaged from high pressure, or you might get very ununiform dripping where this bed is receiving way more water than this bed is receiving because pressure isn't balanced or even in the system. If system pressure is too high, damaged components aren't the worst thing that can happen. What happens if your tubing blows off one of your fittings when you're not at home? You could come home to a flooded yard. And that's why we've included a pressure regulator in all of our drip irrigation kits. Now, just like forgetting a pressure regulator can spell disaster for your system, there are some other ways that your drip irrigation system can go wrong. That's why you'll want to check out this video right here about 5 drip irrigation mistakes that you can avoid. If you're ready to dive right in and start installing your system right now, check out our Getting Started with Drip Irrigation playlist right here. And if you're ready to shop our drip irrigation kits, you can find those right here.